Okay, we're going to get started. Good morning, everyone. Welcome to our 11 o'clock webinar on discussions and demonstrating understanding. I will be shooting you a link here in the chat so that you can access the slide deck and the resources that I'm going to go over. So if you don't know who I am, I'm Nicole Bond. I'm an educational technology specialist here at the Lincoln Intermediate Unit. And I enjoy this slide because this is the slide that shows you really all of the minds that are behind this entire project. So a lot of our webinars are being hosted by any number of people on here, but even if they aren't hosting, they have contributed in some way to building the webinars and to building our LearnOn website if you've been there. So all of these individuals are super important. You'll notice that I've highlighted my contact information so that if you do need to reach out to me, if you have a follow-up question, please feel free to shoot me an email. I will do my best to get back to you as soon as I can. So some of you have probably been to many of our meetings or our webinar meetings. So I'm going to go over just our meeting norms really quickly. And a number of these beginning slides are repeats if you've been to our other meetings. So I'm going to go as quickly as I possibly can, but still hit the major points. So I'm sure many of you have noticed that the chat, the microphone, and the camera have been disabled. This is due to the size of the attendee group. So I am going to ask that if you do have questions to try to put them here in the Q&A pod, because that's going to be the easiest way to kind of draw my attention. If I seem like I keep talking after you've posted something, I will come back to the Q&A pod here at the end and try to answer any and all of your questions if I possibly can. So there's the Q&A. Just keep in mind that everything will be visible to everyone in there. At the end, if you want to raise your hand so that you could use your microphone and speak, I am totally fine with that. This is a somewhat smaller group, a little more intimate, so I would love to hear your voices if you want to ask your question that way instead. And I would just like to remind you at the end when I close the room, there will be an Act 48 credit link that is sent out to you for completion that uses your PPID. I've done this twice now where I've clicked on something that was invisible. Here we go. So just a reminder, this is for our PA educators only. You'll find our webinar archives, which I keep clicking on even though it's invisible, at this bit.ly. You can also find the recorded webinars on our LearnOn website. And that LearnOn website is right down there. It's just learnon.iu12.org. So just to go over some of our changing expectations for online learning as it comes to continuity of education, most of you are probably working for a district that has either chosen to move forward with planned instruction or enrichment and review, or some combination of both. So just keep that in mind as I start to show you tools and resources and how to use them. Also, we want to remember that free and appropriate public education applies to all of our online instruction. And while we often think of FAPE as it applies to those students who have disabilities and ensuring that they are also getting an education, we also need to keep in mind that it does also apply to those students who maybe do not have internet access or access to technology at home. So when we are flipping things online, we have to think about what's that going to look like if we are to send it home paper pencil style. As we continue, I would like to remind you that prioritizing and balancing both on a personal level and on an educational level is important. Less is more. If you do choose to use any video, that it's really, really important that your students have the opportunity to see your smiling face, or maybe just tired face at this point. And try to limit the length of your videos to no more than 6 minutes when you push them out to your students. This might mean you take a longer video and you chunk it into bits and put something else in between those bits. We always want to be clear, make sure that we set our objectives and expectations for our students so they know why they're logging in. They're not just logging in and clicking around blindly and not sure where they're going to go. Identify the time it's going to take to complete a task if you know it already, and organize and sequence your instructions. I cannot stress enough how important checklists are. I've talked to several parents over the past week whose students have been moving to online learning, and I've told them, try a checklist, try a checklist. So when you can send that checklist out to parents, they are so appreciative because then they know they can sit down and say, did we do this? Did we do this? Did we do this? So I'm just going to stress those checklists for all the parents I know out there who would love to have a checklist and be able to check to see that their student did their work very quickly and simply. So some of our webinar outcomes today. You're going to find if you have attended, especially Ben's webinars over the past 2 days with explaining, that I'm going to be showing you a lot of similar tools, maybe just slightly different ways to use them. This idea actually comes from the idea that we really don't want to bombard our students with 20 different new tools that they have to figure out on top of trying to learn all of our content. So when you see me coming back to tools you've heard before, that might be for that reason. I'm also hoping that we can identify how students can demonstrate their understanding through those tools. And I just want to remind you one last time that these webinars are short. And I know that Ben and I have been trying to do them very quickly so that you find yourself not sitting in front of a screen for an entire hour. You may find that you need to check back with your school district. If you have an instructional coach or a tech supervisor, that might be the person you need to check back with as well. I also want to stress that we have a lot of tutorials on our LearnOn website. So if you go back to the LearnOn website, and I can show you here at the end, there's a lot of places you can go to get walkthroughs. And what I like about recorded tutorials, and this might seem simple to explain, but it's really important because I think we don't think about it sometimes, is you can pause them. You can't pause me right now, but when it's recorded, you can go back and hit the pause button and try something, rewind, try it again. So that's where I also want to stress that all of these webinars are being recorded and you will be able to find them on the website. So if I go too quickly and you're a little stressed out, take a breath. And you can maybe go back to the website and look at this later when you're really ready for the tool or when you want to review the tool and prepare. So when it comes to moving our face-to-face discussions to online, there are a lot of considerations to take into play here. Synchronous versus asynchronous, the accessibility for students, the length of time we want discussions to take, the age of our students, and then we want to really think about the tool, whether it's appropriate or not. So I'm going to remind you that any tools that I show you, you really should look at the terms and the privacy statements for those tools. Because some tools sometimes should not be used with those under the age of 13 due to the Children's Online Privacy Protection Act. And I could probably spend 20 minutes just talking about that. So I'm not going to be able to go in depth there, but definitely check out the terms and conditions for any tool that you choose to use, especially if it's a new one that your district doesn't use. But many districts also already have approved lists, so that might be something else to go back and check on. So when it comes to online discussion, I used to be an English language arts teacher. I taught English language arts for 7th and 8th grade for 13 years. And I like to use kind of a blended model in my classroom when I was teaching in a regular classroom. Some of the things we did online and we moved in through groups. So some of the things I'm going to show you, I use with my students in the classroom. So I can give you an idea of what that looks like for 7th and 8th graders especially. One of the things that I know about discussion boards is many of you might already have learning management systems that have them built in. And I really encourage you, if you're using a learning management system, to use the one that is built in if you can, if it already has one. So I can tell you that Canvas has one. I know that Schoology has one, and I'm going to show you how to do it with Google Classroom as well. So if you're using a learning management system, if you're thinking discussion board, I would really stick with the one that's built in. It's one less tool and one less login for your students. When you're setting up an online discussion board, you want to set really clear guidelines. I think when you don't spend a lot of time with discussion boards, just the idea of putting a question there and letting the students answer seems like enough. But I'm in enough teacher groups right now who are using technology who are saying, my students aren't even typing in complete sentences. Well, if you're not putting that as a guideline and an expectation, then they're not going to do it. And some of them probably aren't going to do it anyway, just because they want to poke the bear because of our situation. But I think a lot of times students just don't think about it. Maybe they've been texting and then they move over to that particular board and go to post, and they're not thinking about what your expectations are. So this really comes back to that objectives and expectations piece. If you're going to do a discussion, you need to identify how long you want it to be. Look, I'm looking for 5 complex sentences with a topic sentence, all right? Think about the length if it's video. I'm looking for 1 full minute. I'm looking for 2 minutes. And you can set minutes in Flipgrid if you use that for discussions, but setting those guidelines up front and making it perfectly clear what your expectations are, that's really gonna save you some time in the long run, trust me. So length, topics, how to respond, in what amount, and try to make sure your questions aren't just basic fact questions, because what's gonna happen on your discussion boards is the kids are just gonna cheat. Anytime you ask them to do something and it's an easy one-word answer or it's a multiple choice, many of them have cell phones or a way of contacting. I'm talking especially our secondary, maybe not our littles, but they're gonna find ways to share answers with each other. They're students, this happens. I would like to expect more out of our kids, and I think that is important too, but you also think about how you can make the question so that they can't cheat, right? It's a personal answer, or it's an answer that's gonna be individualized for each student. When you can, please provide feedback. In fact, I think that's even more important now that we've gone online. That idea of feedbacking giving feedback and coaching the responses, suggesting, hey, I really appreciate what you said here. I thought you had some great ideas. It would have been wonderful if you'd put them in complete sentences or included a topic sentence, or did you think about? So as much as you want to host discussion for students to go back and forth, also think about how you can contribute to that discussion and encourage a better level of response. And when you can, try to track your participation. Encourage lurkers when you can. I find when you do especially live discussion, you're going to have students, especially who aren't used to maybe Google Meet if you're using it, or Zoom, who maybe just keep everything muted and off and they're quiet. So say something like, hey, you know, Brandon, I wish you would contribute to this discussion a little more. Do you have any ideas? Or do you have any thoughts? So that level of encouragement, whether it is live or even online, sometimes is great. Additionally, saying, hey, you know, if you're reading a discussion thread post, somebody has a good idea that you think ties in, hey, you should go back and look at so-and-so's post about this topic too. He's really passionate as well. So those are just some things to think about when you move to online discussion boards. When it comes to synchronous discussion, you have Zoom and you have Google Hangouts Meet and probably a host of other ones that people are starting to vet, because I know some educators and groups aren't using Zoom or are moving away from Zoom. So that is fabulous. I would just like to remind you that Zoom is a higher bandwidth source. So just keep in mind that if you don't have high bandwidth, this could be a complication. Moving on, especially as all of us start to move online, if we're all Zooming simultaneously and working from home, this could be an issue. So I love the idea of synchronous video when we can to check in. And I think the idea of choosing office hours and setting them up either in a Google Calendar or I put a link in here to Calendly, which will also help you with that. Setting them up that way might be a better way and a better use of both time. And that way you have it set up maybe so that you're meeting more one-on-one and you're not trying to manage a room full of 20 to 30 students or maybe even more. So think about how you could schedule meetups that way if you're going to go with this sort of thing. Discussion-wise, when you move into Zoom or Google Hangouts, always try to have it set so that everyone comes in muted. That will help you control the situation. You may also want to set it so that all the cameras are off initially as well until you start to set those Zoom meeting norms. And there are a million Zoom meeting norms out there. If you start to Google education and Zoom meeting norms, you're going to find that lots of teachers have done that legwork for you. So I totally encourage you to just go out on a great hunt and search and find them. We also have several linked into our Zoom site on our LearnOn website if you would go there. So I'm going to go into some of the other tools and ways to use them for discussion. What I have here are some of our Google basics. Docs, slides, and sheets can all be used as a discussion forum if you're not using a learning management system with something built in. And what I've done is linked in a couple of templates and ways to do it so that you can make a copy of these babies and run with it if you would like to. What I would like to point out before I start clicking on this page and taking us out to these resources, down at the bottom, I have listed a Facebook group for teachers using Google Classroom. If you use social media, I would say it's one of the most fabulous resources if you're looking for tips, tools, tricks, if you've got questions, if you've done something and it's not working. Joining any of the Google Facebook groups seems to be a really great place. I will be honest, some of the materials and resources that I'm finding and I'm sharing with you are ones that I found through the groups that I'm a member of. So teachers using Google Classroom, I think there's teachers using Google Suite. If you're a Google teacher and you know you're going to be using these resources in the coming weeks, I highly encourage you to join those groups. Even if you just lurk and never post anything, you're going to see other teachers posting, hey, I did this and it's not working. Why isn't it working? And you'll see 20 different people answering that question. There's people posting resources, stuff that's already made that you can make copies of and use. So these are fabulous places to go and kind of just sift through to get ideas and to troubleshoot any problems that you're having. I'm going to go up here to the template for discussion in Google Docs just to give you an idea. So one of the things you can do is create like a Google Doc that's a question and then assign each doc to each class. Assign a time to meet up so you can all type simultaneously, or you can use the class feature, or you can treat it like a slow chat where you send it out and anyone can kind of post in it. So this is just a really short, easy template, and I've already got it to force make a copy. So if you're in the slide deck, it's going to make a copy for you automatically. She says. So as you go in, you'll see this document I've kind of set up. I put question 1, student name, response in here. And what I would do is one of the things that you can do with the student responses, and I just want to show you this feature, is if I'm maybe another student, or I can be in here as a teacher, is I can add a comment. And continue the conversation down the side. So one of the things that'll happen is if you're all commenting is it'll let you reply to these comments. It'll come up and say reply. And it's not just to your own comments, it's to each other's. And if your students are all logged in, it'll come up with their names in these replies. So you can do that potentially as a way of holding a conversation, a slow chat in here. Another thing that I want to show you, if I go up here to file, is version history. This can be really important when you're working in a Google Doc with several students who maybe want to try to sabotage one another. If that is something that you are doing, make sure, if this is really great if students have a login and they have a Google login and they're already logged in, it will show you version history and it will show you everybody who's typed in the document and when they typed in the document, and it will put it in different colors. So this is a resource I also used as an English language arts teacher to check for plagiarism, because it would show me if a student literally copied and pasted a whole bunch of text in all at once. So again, that's under File, Version History, see Version History. It also works in Google Slides. It doesn't show the text per se, it'll show which block they were in Google Slides, but that version history can sometimes offer a little insight if you're not sure what's going on in that particular document. So I am going to check here at some of my questions because I noticed a couple just popped up. So let's see, I'm going to start here at the top. What is the easiest way for me to share our Google Meet link with students when kids aren't familiar with Google Calendar? Where do you get the link to post to Google Calendar? Okay, so I'm not going to go into the details of Google Meet right now and take us in that direction, but I can say when it comes to Google Meet that you can just post the link and share it in the most secure way possible. I have talked to some educators when they're doing the Google Meet link, what they're finding is with middle school, high schoolers, they're sharing the link with other classmates and other classes who are then coming in and disrupting sometimes with the Meet. So I would just be, however you choose to share that link. If you know your students have a school-based email, it might be that you want to do it that way. It may also be that you want to contact it and send it through parents. One of the things that I will point out about Google, I don't have the resources pulled up here, but Google has a ton of resources up right now for educators and some that are very specific to Google Meet. I'm going to leave your question in here, Jessica, because I want to come back to it. I might be able to pull up that resource and send it to you at the end of this conversation. So I don't want to say that I answered this question yet. I'm going to come back to it. I see L. Singley, how long are your LIU slide decks going to be available the remainder of the school year? They might be up indefinitely. At least the remainder of the school year. They are not going away, and we are probably going to continue to add to our webinars, maybe not as fast and furious as we have in the past week and a half, but we will be definitely keeping them on our recorded webinars page. Rachel, I see you have a question. I am a high school Spanish teacher transitioning to using online discussion board for my students who speak Spanish at home. Before the closure, they were getting the hang of discussion in person. How do I keep them from using Google Translate now that they're online? There may not be an easy answer to that question, Rachel. I would say that I would use your best practice knowledge with Google Translate. I don't know what level of Spanish you're working on, if they're like a level 3 Spanish student or a level 1 Spanish student. The nice thing about Google Translate is that sometimes it makes sentence syntax kind of obvious, I think, when it comes to that translation. Like there's something just a little off that you think that it is that. When you're using an online discussion board like this, that version history will show you if it was, like, it'll give you an idea if it was all copied and pasted, like a very vague idea. It'll show you like all of this text showed up in 1 minute on April 1st. That is the best way I would say to get around that idea of using Google Translate now that we're online. I would say I would try to use Flipgrid with them as much to make them actually speak it instead of write it. That way you know they're speaking it and you'll be able to kind of gauge how they're saying things. If they're reading off of something, maybe that might give you a little bit of an answer, but that's the best troubleshoot I've got on that one. That might be That's a good question. I would see if you have any personal learning networks with some language teachers that you might want to reach out and see what other educators in the language area might be doing with that one. Again, I'm going to put you back on the Facebook groups if you're on Facebook or even on Twitter. You might be able to, that's a good question to kind of ask out to a PLN and see if anybody's already troubleshot that one. I don't have a direct answer. That's the best answer I can give you on that one. And Laura, you set up the template yourself before going in. Yes, this template's in that slide deck. So if you click on it, it's going to force make a copy and give you this template for you to use. It's really, really simplistic. It's not very fancy, but I set it up, and I would set it up before I shared it with students. And I would maybe even put the students' names in here. If I were the person, you know, if I were the teacher, I would put the students' names so I could keep track of things. If I know they're going to then log in as themselves, that's when I can go up and see file, Google history, and make sure they're not typing under each other's names and trying to circumnavigate my grand plans. Okay, I see that there is an answer possibly for you on the language. It says, don't use Google Translate. It will not necessarily give you correct translation. It's only good for single nouns and verb infinitives. So that might be something that you can keep in mind if you go to use a tool like this and you're concerned about Google Translate. So French Spanish teacher, it's only good for single nouns and verb infinitives. So keep that in mind for those students who might be using Google Translate. That might be what you need to keep in mind. Okay, I'm going to keep us moving here through our slide deck with slides. So the last two here are actually from Alice Keeler. I'm going to skip the Sheets one there. It's there if you want, but there's a script that runs in it. And I would say I would only use it if you're very, very comfortable using Sheets. For me, I'm somewhat comfortable with Sheets. I could make it work, but it's not my favorite. I do like her slides template though. So if you go to discussion slides with Alice Keeler with me, and again, these are all linked in that slide deck. Alice Keeler is a great resource for Google, as well as Casey Bell if you're looking for Google things. If you look up Casey Bell or Alice Keeler, most of them have made templates that you can already use. So she has one that's a discussion template that is already made for you in Google Slides. And the how-to and discussions, the idea of the making comments. So you'll see like plus, if your students are logged in their Google accounts, if you have Google accounts, they can do that to comment with one another as well. So if I can find the template link, I will click on it. Discussion template. So again, it's going to force you to make a copy. And she already has her directions in there, which is one of the things that I really, really, really love. So share a copy of this template with your class. Utilize the slides template to structure your lesson discussion. So over here is where you'll add. She's even got a picture in there. So question 2. I can add multiple questions in here. But I can also add responses. So you see how these are labeled? So if I pose question 1 in that slide, this is response 1. Student will type their name up there and they can type their response. I love using shared slide decks because it becomes really easy for me to sift through responses. So I'm going to move question 2 down here because I didn't need to do that. So question 1, how do you, whatever. And then as students go in, they can type their name. Or you can type their name and give them response slides. I find sometimes that's a little easier if your students aren't familiar with Google Slides and what your expectations are. If you just put their names in there, they're going to figure out, hey, that's where my response goes. And they can type their response in here. And this is also where we can then, if they want to comment, they can comment using that comment button that I have my mouse sitting on right there and comment to one another. They can also tag each other by using the plus sign. Okay, can you embed Google Slide decks into Schoology? I believe that you can. You can either link them or embed them. I think there is a direct play-in with Schoology to do Google Slide decks, but you're going to have to check directly with your tech group on the Schoology bit. And it also depends on if you're using the free one or the big district paid for Schoology. I think the big district paid for Schoology has a direct Google integration that you'll be able to embed them directly. I'm not sure if the free one does. You might just have to put the link in there. So you would recommend a slides for elementary students over a doc? Yes, and I would clearly label which slide and their names. So I would put their names at the top. I wouldn't give an elementary student a chance to even type their name. And I would just, honestly, if I were the first time I would do it, I would say at this time, if you want help, I'll be in there too, so that you can watch them and help them if they're typing into their slides. One of the other things I suggest, especially if it's a new tool that your elementary students have never used Google Slides before and they don't know how to use it, I really highly suggest doing like a really quick screencast tutorial. You could do that with Screencast-O-Matic or Screencastify, and now even Flipgrid is letting you screencast. So that is also something that you might want to think about. For sequencing, writing digital responses versus verbal and sharing. I'm not quite sure of your question, Jessica. It says, do you recommend any tips for sequencing, writing digital responses versus verbal sharing out? My biggest tips are set expectations. Tell them exactly what you want. Like, and here I would, up in the directions that Alice gives us, after I get it set up the way I want, I would delete the teacher directions. Keep this arrow up here. I'm pointing at my screen like you can see me. Keep this arrow up here. And then in students, I would put my expectations right here on a written response. If it's a verbal response, same deal. Like, I want it in complete sentences. You should start with a topic sentence. It should include, for me, I was a 7th grade English teacher, so I would be asking for 2 quoted pieces of evidence. So being as explicit as possible in anything you're asking from those students, so that they can't just go in and type whatever, they know that you have expectations for them, is really going to help. With moving online, sometimes students will, especially if they're not used to typing digitally and submitting work with you, they will tend to go right to, at least I would say 5th grade on especially, maybe even elementary level, they will go right to text speak. I find, especially with my middle schoolers, they just start texting, typing into it because it's digital. They don't put together that, oh, I should be using academic language. So I always make it that one of those things that I really stress at the beginning. And I do the same thing verbally, that verbally when you're explaining this to me, you're not explaining this to me like your brother sitting next to you while you guys are gaming. You're explaining this to me as your teacher, just like you would explain it to me as your boss. So I would keep that in mind too. So in an effort to honor our time, I'm going to keep us moving here. The Sheets link is here as well if you would like to use that. And I do have a slide deck in here. There's kind of a how-to of version history. I just jumped over that slide, but you can see it. If you are in Google Classroom, there is a way to set up discussion. One of the largest issues that many of us have had when they're doing discussion is, at least in Google Classroom, is that there hasn't been a discussion board. If you've used Schoology or Canvas or any of the other learning management systems, you know that a lot of these have discussion boards. Even if you've taken a college class and used Moodle, or you've used Blackboard, all right, whatever you've used, they usually have discussion boards. And then you get to Google Classroom and it's like, hey, you can share your stuff and you can assign things and put forms in here, but you can't. So in the last year or two, they've added the question, which can be used like a discussion board. It's not going to be as elaborate, but I do want to point out that it's there. If you are a Google Classroom user, it's under Create Question. And you can put your question in here, and this is the box that will come up. You'll put your question. It's a short answer question, so you can't necessarily do a whole essay in there. But you can do that. You can also add materials if you want to with your instructions. I would be really specific with your instructions. Like I said, say exactly what you want from the student, or if you want them to reply, et cetera, et cetera. And then the class you want, the students you want, so you can choose certain ones, or you can give it to everyone, points or no points, due date, no topic. And then this box right down here, students can reply to each other, and students can edit answers. So you can choose if you want them to reply to each other. Down here is what it will show up like in your feed, or on your classroom page. So you'll see who's turned it in and who isn't. You can view it and you'll be able to see them replying to one another. If you are going to be using Google Classroom and you're fairly new to it, I do just want to point out a couple of resources on this page. First of all, there will be a Google Classroom tutorial. It's going to be on April 7th at 11 a.m. Charlie's doing it. Charlie used Google Classroom in his class. I have also used Google Classroom quite a bit. So if you're using Google Classroom, I used it for the last 3 years with my 7th and 8th graders. So I'm fairly familiar with some of the resources and tools and how to use them. You will also find that at this link, you're going to find some LearnOn Google Classroom resources that are very specific kind of how-tos to get you started. And down here is a tutorial on how to set up a discussion board. So I see a couple more questions coming in. I want to try to honor these and answer them. I'm going to start up here. All right, I see Jess makes Your discussion, I think verbal processing, thinking I could use a slide deck, writing prior to a live Google Meet so they reflect. I think that is a fabulous idea, Jessica. Having students reflect before you meet up is really great. I'm someone who typically likes to process information before I verbalize it. So even doing this Q&A is a little hard for me. It's one of the reasons I read it out loud and I have to think about it. Thinking on my feet, I think that that's a fabulous, fabulous way of doing it so that the students can process and bring to the discussion exactly what they want to do. That may also help curb the kind of chaos that happens for those synchronous meetings when the kids come in, they're loud and they're off task. If you've already identified before that meeting exactly how that meeting is going to run and what the expectation is, they're going to be less likely to be disruptive in your synchronous meeting. I see Swartz has a question down here. Swartz D, and Schoology teachers can make Google assignments out of their Google Drive. A slide becomes a template which students can then complete and submit. It then shows up in Schoology Gradebook. There you go. So there is your answer to your Schoology question. Fabulous. Thank you, Swartz D. Okay. So a couple of other ways that we can do discussion, and I know that we're already at 30 minutes and I feel like I got through maybe half of my slides. The Backchannel Chat, Ben went over this in explaining. So if you want to go back to that webinar, you can check out Backchannel Chat in his explaining webinar, I believe. It's really, really simple, easy to use. Essentially, as soon as you click in, it's going to set up a chat room and you can password protect it. It's teacher controlled. You can actually print the entire transcript when you're done. I would say it's good for like quick discussion, like I need to meet with some kids and get through some things, but if you're looking for like the formal idea of a discussion, this may not be the resource that I would want to use. I've been telling a couple of teachers here that I was just talking to earlier today, they were getting bombarded with emails. One of the teachers said, I have had over 100 emails of students telling me they don't know how to submit an assignment. And she can't do synchronous. So I had suggested, well, maybe if you create a back channel chat and send that link out, you can meet with those students in there and you can type them through it versus sending 100 replied emails. That might help. So this is a very nice tool for that. No personal identification is sent out with this, and there is a profanity filter, which I find very nice, and no advertising. Another version of back channel chat is something called YoTeach. YoTeach I would use in smaller groups. It's a little bit of a heavier lift. It has more things in it. One of the things I do like about it is that it does have a text reader and will actually read out loud. So I have some links in there to YoTeach, but I'm not going to dive into YoTeach. If it's something that you're interested in, this link will take you to a testing room, FAQ, and a video tutorial. I want to show you Padlet because I know that we've talked about it and some people have gone in and clicked on it, but you haven't seen really what it looks like on the teacher's end. And I want to go over this really quickly. I'm going to do it in 2 minutes. So I'm going to apologize for how fast I'm doing this. All right, so if we go into Padlet, this is what the teacher dashboard looks like. All right, I don't have any Padlet. Oh, I do have one because I tried that a couple of days or 4 hours ago. I was playing in here. So you can have up to 3 live at a time. And I feel like that's a caveat that everyone needs to know, especially if you teach more than 3 classes and you think you're going to have 5 of them live at a time. You can't. You need to have 3. You can archive them and bring them back and kind of play with your archived folder, but you have to have a paid for account to use more than 3 at a time. That said, if you've used Padlet before and you already had 20 in here, it kind of honors, like, grandfathers you in if you are somebody who's had a Padlet account for a really long time. But I want to show you when you go in to make a Padlet, that's that plus sign, and all I did was make an account and it brought me right to this page, that there are a lot of different ways to make a Padlet. All right, I can do a wall and do a brick layout. I can do a shelf and actually organize the columns and label them for discussion, and I can do a back channel chat. Okay, so there's a lot of different options if I want to do that. So I'm going to go to back channel just to show you that one really fast. And it will automatically decide on what they want to call it, and you can go in and change everything in here, which I don't want to do. I can require approval. I can do that for any of my Padlets. So if I want to be able to monitor it, I can also filter profanity. So as a teacher of 7th and 8th graders who never use profanity, I just want to be extra careful. This is my link. I just want to make sure I have my filters right so that you guys can type in it too. All right, my link is copied to my clipboard, and I think if I throw this guy in the chat, you guys will be able to go in here and type with me if you want. So you'll see it kind of posts like that. So it makes a back channel chat, and you could just make one of these really fast. And you'll notice it goes to the left, to the right, to the left, to the right, and it has you in as anonymous. You can, I think, go in and set your names. Jess is doing awesome. All right, I'm glad to be helpful, Jess. So you get an idea of how Padlet works. And that was really quick for me to flip and set up. So I just wanted to make sure you got the chance to see what that teacher end might look like. And if I leave it, your guys are gonna be able to still chat. So I would keep that in mind because I'm gonna leave this space, and I believe the Padlet will be there. So the kids can still type in it. So it might be something where you wanna throw it up, do it, delete it fast, so you don't have the kids having random conversations in here unless that's exactly what you want to go down. You can, and you saw when I was in here, there were a couple of different versions. So I encourage you to play with it, get together with a couple of your teachers and have them work through how this might work. So I'm gonna X this out. You guys can keep chatting in there if you'd like. All right, the other one I'd like to show you is Flipgrid. And I don't have enough time to show you the back channel or the teacher in depth, but let me just say that there are a lot of resources on this page. So if you've been someone where like, every time I log in and Ben and Nicole go to show us Flipgrid, they run out of time, all right? On this page, there are tons of links. First of all, up here on the LearnOn site, we have tutorials. We have tutorials for the teacher and tutorials for the student. So if you're not sure if your student's gonna work through it. They just added the ability to screencast onto Flipgrid in the last 2 days. It's in beta mode, so it might be a little glitchy. They're still working it out, but they heard educators and they totally wanted to answer them. So that's in there. GridPal, if you're somebody who's wanting to connect with other educators and maybe like take this to a whole nother level where students would talk and have a conversation, that would be a way to do that. And down here at the bottom, you heard me talk about Facebook groups. Guys, this is where I get all of my Flipgrid information. This Facebook group of Flipgrid educators have ideas for how you can use it in your class. They will answer your questions. They will help you figure out any problems that you're having. I know if you're not a social media person, that doesn't help you, but one of the things I think a lot of times happens with educators is we talk about kind of the educator Twitter, and there's a really, really great group on Twitter too. But there are actually a lot of groups on Facebook as well, and maybe that's more my early millennial generation. But I would definitely check it out, even if it's a matter of lurking and not like responding and replying. It might be something that you want to think about. Okay, folks, I really appreciate it. I'm going to encourage you if you have more questions, and especially Jessica, I saw your question there. If you want to shoot me an email, I can email back to you all of the information you might need to help get you started there. With your question on Google Meet, I can send you some resources. My email is nabond@iu12.org. So if you would like to reach out to me, that would be fabulous. This slide deck has tons of other resources that you might want to check out that Ben and I have mentioned, but I can't go into. So I'm just going to remind you that on the LearnOn page is where the continuing webinars are. And as I exit us out today, you will be pushed out to the Act 48 link. And if possible, if you could do our web eval, that is also on our website as well. So I really appreciate it. I hope everyone has a great day and that you've really been enjoying our webinars. Our next one will start at noon. Thank you.